Who am I? It's the age-old question. We all come to a point in our lives when we feel the need to look within and ask this essential question. And we hear from the Vedas, the scriptures of India, that we are spirit soul. And on one level, we can appreciate this, we can identify with it. It makes sense to us. We feel that our consciousness is distinct from the physical world of matter. We feel that we can all feel in our hearts that there's an eternal world beyond this world of mortality. So it makes sense, this idea that we are eternal spiritual beings. But at the same time, to actually realize that in a tangible way is difficult. And so I wanted to discuss a verse in Bhagavad Gita which analyzes the separating layers between ourselves and the soul, which through a process of elimination can help us to bring us to that revelation of soul, to feel that, to identify that spark of consciousness within us behind all of these outer layers. So this is a verse in Bhagavad Gita, Indriyani pranyohor indriyebhya paramanaha manasastu parabuddhir yo buddhe paratastu sa. So we can understand from this verse that first there are the objects of the senses. There is this physical world of matter around us. And then so this verse is analyzing a gradation, going from more gross to more subtle aspects of existence. So there's the most gross expression of physical matter. And then on a more subtle level are the senses, which are engaging and interacting with different aspects of this physical environment, So the eyes are giving us the sense of sight, ears, sense of sound, tongue, sense of taste. Then there's the sense of touch. We're getting through our skin. We're getting the sense of smell, through our nose. So these senses are collecting this information from the environment, giving us different, readings of these different aspects of the environment. And then they are depositing that information in our mind. And the mind is described as the seat. The mind is more subtle than the senses. And the mind is described as being the seat of all sense experience. So what's interesting is we can observe, to see the distinction between the mind and the senses, we can observe that if we are inattentive, if our mind is somewhere else, then we won't necessarily pick up on some sensory information that our senses are collecting. So, for example, maybe you're tasting something very nice and your friend is telling you a long story, but you're so absorbed in eating this wonderful ice cream or whatever it may be, your friend will finish their story. So what do you think? Sorry, can you say that again? You picked up, your sense of hearing picked that information up, but because your mind was somewhere else, then it didn't register with you, Or you may be driving a car and your mind is somewhere else, you're not paying attention on the road, there's an accident, you're talking and texting at the same time, or multitasking. And inevitably one of these, something will be neglected because your mind can't attend to all these things at once. Your senses are picking up the information, but your mind is in another place, so it's not registering and you can't process that information properly. And the mind is mostly dealing with the functions of like and dislike, acceptance and rejection. I like it or I don't like it. There's no discrimination there. It's like an instant reaction. So you see, especially in young children, their minds are very strong. Their powers of discrimination are not very developed. And so you get these kind of like instant knee-jerk reactions from them. I like this or I don't like it. It's difficult to reason with them. Like if you're trying to give them some medicine, if they don't like the taste, they'll just say, I don't like it. I'm not taking it. You can't reason with them. Oh, this is good for you. This is healthy for you. Please take it. You can't explain that to them. And you may just have to trick them into taking it, by making it more tasty, more flavorful for them. You see also persons who have addictions. They just can't help themselves, So they'll be smoking their cigarette or drinking alcohol or whatever it may be, and they know this is bad for them. They know this is killing them, but because their minds are very strong, they're not able to give that up. So then this brings us to the next, more subtle layer of our material existence, and that is the intellect, the plane of intellect. And it is the intellect which gives us the power of discrimination. The intellect is rational. The intellect considers. So your mind may say, I want to eat this rich chocolate cake right now, but your intellect will say, well, that won't be good for your heart, that won't be good for your cholesterol, that won't be good for your diabetes, so I better not, or maybe I'll just take this tiny little piece. So the intellect will discriminate and will override, if necessary, the dictations of the mind, the impulses of the mind. And then this verse of Bhagavad Gita continues to describe the soul, the spark of consciousness that is behind all of these different functions. The plane of the senses, which are collecting, which are our first contact with this world, which are collecting information from this world. The mind, which is telling us we like it or we don't like it. And then the intellect, which is discriminating and rationalizing about all of this information that we're collecting and processing. And then most subtle of all is the plane of soul, which is of a spiritual nature, because all of these other layers, they're actually within the category of subtle matter. In Bhagavad Gita, it describes 8 elements of the material plane, 5 gross, earth, water, fire, air, ether, and then 3 subtle, mind, intellect. And then there's also the ahankar, the ego, this is the most subtle of our material existence. And this is the most binding element of our existence in this world. The ego is that element that creates this bondage of identification with this world. It's very subtle and it is very, very difficult to identify. It is this energy which creates this identification, with anything of this world, that I'm a man, that I'm a woman, that I'm African, that I'm American, that I'm French, that I'm Chinese, that I'm rich, that I'm poor, that causes us to identify with this material body and the circumstances in which we find ourselves at present. And so it is this ego, this ahankar, this false ego, that creates filters in our analysis of this world, that causes us to analyze this world on the basis of these temporary designations that we currently identify with. So this ahankar is causing us to identify with whatever set of karmic circumstances we presently find ourselves in. Another way my grandfather Guru Srila Sridhar Maharaj has explained this is he described the ego, the ahankar, as like a machine that is receiving and transmitting false information. Because we have these filters, as I mentioned, which are influencing how we perceive the environment. So we're through these filters, we're receiving like these distorted signals, and then we're transmitting that out to the environment and reinforcing that within ourselves and others. And then finally, behind all of these different layers, there is the plane of soul. And there's a wonderful analogy given in the scripture Srimad Bhagavatam, which explains how, the relationship between the soul and all these different layers. And so the analogy is of a bright moon on a cloudy night. If you look at the sky on a cloudy night, then you won't see the moon. You'll just see the clouds. But at the same time, we understand that the only way that, although we cannot see the moon, the only way we can see the clouds is because of the light of the moon behind. It's a very peculiar thing if you think about it. You can't see the moon, but you know the moon is there because you can see the clouds. And those very clouds, they are blocking the direct vision of the moon. So in the same way it is described in this verse, that the light of the soul is behind all of these layers of our material existence. And it is the soul which is illuminating and activating, allowing these functions to take place. But at the same time, these layers are obscuring the soul. They are covering the soul, and so we cannot directly contact the soul. Srila Sridhar Maharaj explains in one place that the interconnecting layers, they are so close together that you cannot find the line of demarcation. Like if you put your finger very close to your eye, you cannot see it anymore. You can't see your glasses because they're very close to your eyes. So when something's very, very close, then those lines of separation, they become blurry. You can't distinguish anymore. So it is a very peculiar situation that we're in right now. That light of consciousness, that bright spark of consciousness is behind, activating, illuminating these functions. But then these layers are also obscuring that, so we cannot immediately contact that spiritual plane, that spirit within us. So this is a very helpful analysis that we find in Srimad Bhagavad Gita. And if anyone will simply sit, in some mood of meditation and quietly, they can look within themselves. They can find what is that element within myself that is analyzing, that is discriminating. What is that element within myself that is impulsively accepting, rejecting the things of this world, the plane of my experience? What is this subtle element within myself that is rigidly attached to a particular conception of life, that is rigidly attached to a particular conception, identity of this world? And then what is that most subtle and conscious element behind all of these things? And if we can once get some contact of that, then our faith will become very strong. Then we will understand this is real. This is also mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, Ascharyavat Pashyati Kaschid Enam, that at every step in contact, as one contacts that plane of spirit, one will experience wonder. At every point, one will experience wonder, and one will feel, such a great and high, exalted thing is within myself. And when we have that touch of higher reality, then all these other things that are normally attractive to the minds, to the senses, to the instinct, they will appear like garbage. We will feel, this higher thing is so wonderful, so attractive. How could I possibly have been running after these things before? How is it possible I could have found some taste in these things before? This is such a great and noble and wonderful thing within myself. So this is a meditation that we can all, sit and try to give some attention to and see, what will we find within ourselves. Jai Shri Gurudev.